On Thursdays, after a full day of IBD Clinic, I really like to reflect on what's happened, the insights that I've gained from my patients, the challenges that we've had. And often it's from a position of feeling a bit worn down. It's often a very busy day. The clinic is really, fully booked the whole time. And usually what happens on a Thursday here in Edinburgh is that Ian Arnott and I run our big IBD clinics in parallel with the team there to assist. So we have excellent clinical fellows and trainees and the IBD nurses down in clinic with us. This week, Ian's away. He's on a well-deserved vacation. And I still had the full suite of juniors with me. And my clinic for once was booked to template. It was not overbooked. And what did this allow? Well, it allowed two things. One is it provides a really excellent and rich teaching opportunity for the trainees and fellows and the nurses to ensure that we are really able to impart best wisdom, to illustrate how to accurately take a history from IBD patients, to problem solve, but also how to really explore how the illnesses are affecting people's lives. And that brings me on to my second key point, which is that for me personally, today I had much more time than I would normal. And that does some weeks allow for very interesting conversations. And today, really, there were a couple of things that struck me, a couple of things in terms of how people are responding to their therapy and how that is turning around their lives for the positive. And then a couple of instances, one in particular, where I was looking back to people's previous history, how they had been when their colitis was first diagnosed 10, 20, 30, in one case even 40 years ago. And one anecdote struck particularly, and without going into any specifics, thinking about how stress and major life events can not only apparently trigger disease onset, but also very substantial flares, and where all other things are taken out of the equation appears to be a very true phenomenon. And I wonder how many times we actually afford ourselves the luxury, or indeed do our job properly, to really explore triggers beyond the standard things like an infection, but to look into the stresses that can exist. And as we move into the second half of this decade, we are getting, I think, very good information now that the link between the brain and the gut and the signaling of both major neurological things like depression and anxiety and the impact that that has on the gut, but also the impact that inflammation has, vice versa, going back to the brain, is very, very much more interlinked than we had thought. Just in the last week, and I will do a separate piece on this in a more deeper dive, there has been a paper that has demonstrated the precise set of neurons in the brainstem that respond to inflammatory signals in the body. And so if we were to use the gut and inflammatory bowel disease as a specific example here, we now know that there is a brainstem region that will recognize the inflammatory cytokines that are swirling around the blood when someone has active Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. This brainstem center is then regulating the inflammatory response. So a master central nervous system regulator of inflammatory processes in the body that has not only been identified but has been more precisely mapped to a particular region of the brainstem. And so there we are. I think a sympathetic voice to colleagues around the country, because really everyone is short of time. There are huge pressures in the NHS right now, and I know that this is mirrored in other healthcare services around the world. We don't have the luxury of time that we would so often like to be able to spend with our patients. Where it does exist, and I think we are good at making the time when it's really necessary from a clinical point of view, but not always so good from a psychological and life point of view for our patients. Where it does exist, what I think we're left with as physicians is a much more enriched environment to care for our patients. Deeper learnings that I think can really inform our research efforts as well as our clinical practice in the future. And for our patients, I'm sure, a much better environment within which to receive their care. A final reflection as I finish this, going back to before the pandemic, where our waiting room on a Thursday afternoon was packed. And at times, it would be almost tempting to consider that some kind of badge of honor about how much work we do and how good that is that we're able to see so many patients. But the reality of it was that people were waiting a long time and they were not always getting our full attention, or they were getting our full attention but not for long enough to really address the problems properly. And so I think with better systems of care, with better distributed care to our specialist nurses, with more remote care follow-ups via telemedicine, with the ability hopefully in the future to have much more stratified care and monitoring programs where we can be much more responsive to our patients' needs rather than blanket reviewing people on an automatic schedule. So those are the ends of the thoughts today. Thursdays will be thoughts from the clinic in Atomic IBD Uncut. There's going to be a deeper dive into disease heterogeneity coming at the weekend, so look forward to that, please. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please share the word, because I do want these videos to be as helpful to as many people as possible. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.